The ground shook beneath Jake Morrison's boots as another explosion rocked the colony. Black smoke rose from the burning buildings of New Haven, painting the orange sky of Kepler 442 even darker. The acrid smell of melted metal and burning plastic filled his nostrils as he pressed his back against the concrete wall of the communication center. Jake checked his rifle one more time. 47 rounds left in the magazine. 3 spare clips on his belt. Not much against an entire alien army, but it would have to do. The 28-year-old Marine sergeant had seen worse odds before, though never quite this bad. The evacuation sirens had stopped wailing an hour ago. The last transport ship had lifted off 30 minutes before that, carrying the final group of colonists to safety. Jake had volunteered to stay behind along with 12 other Marines to buy time for the evacuation. Now he was the only one left alive. The Zephyrian collective had hit the colony fast and hard. Their insectoid warriors moved like a swarm of angry hornets, chittering and clicking as they tore through the human defenses. Jake had watched his fellow Marines fall one by one, overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the enemy. Lieutenant Danny Brooks had been the last to go, cut down by alien claws just 50 meters from where Jake now stood. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and peered around the corner of the building. The main street was crawling with Zephyrians. Their hard, shell-like skin gleamed in the firelight, and their forearms moved with quick, jerky motions. Each one stood about 7 feet tall, with mandibles that could snap a human bone in half. They moved in perfect coordination, like parts of a single mind, but Jake had noticed something during the fight. The aliens were predictable. They always attacked in the same patterns, always moved in the same formations. It was like fighting a computer program that never learned new tricks. That might be his only advantage. The communication center behind him held the most important piece of equipment on the planet. The quantum beacon contained the exact coordinates of Earth and 12 other human worlds. If the Zephyrians got their claws on that data, they could jump their fleet directly to humanity's core systems. Billions of people would die. Jake pulled out his combat knife and began cutting strips of plastic from a damaged wall panel. He had work to do. The aliens would be here soon, and he needed to be ready. He moved quickly through the communication center, setting up his defenses. The building had 3 main entrances and a dozen windows big enough for an alien to crawl through. Jake couldn't cover them all, but he could make the aliens pay for every step they took. First, he rigged explosive charges at the main entrance. The colony's emergency supplies included enough demolition equipment to level half the building if needed. Jake set the charges to detonate on a remote trigger, then moved to the side entrances. At the east door, he stacked furniture and equipment to create a narrow funnel. The aliens would have to squeeze through one at a time, making them easy targets. At the west door, he placed motion sensors connected to automated turrets salvaged from the colony's perimeter defenses. The windows were trickier. Jake didn't have enough explosives to booby-trap them all, so he focused on the ones that offered the best views of the surrounding area. He placed sensors and alarms that would tell him exactly where the aliens were coming from. As he worked, Jake's mind wandered to his sister Lisa back on Earth. She was probably sitting in her apartment in New Chicago, watching the news about the alien invasion. She had no idea her brother was trapped on a distant world, facing impossible odds. Jake had promised to come home for her birthday next month. It looked like he might have to break that promise. The building's internal communication system crackled to life. Jake had jury-rigged it to pick up alien transmissions, and the chittering sounds of Zephyrian speech filled the air. He couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the excitement in their voices. They had found him. Jake climbed to the second floor and looked out through a broken window. The aliens were gathering in the street below, hundreds of them. They moved with the same coordinated precision he had seen all day, forming neat rows and columns. Their leaders stood at the front, slightly larger than the others, with more elaborate markings on their shells. The human marine counted at least 500 Zephyrians in the first wave. More were arriving every minute, pouring out of the side streets and alleys. Within an hour, there would be thousands of them surrounding the building. Jake checked his watch. The evacuation fleet would reach the jump point in 6 hours. After that, they would be safe, jumping back to human space to warn Earth about the invasion. All he had to do was hold out until then. 6 hours against an army of aliens who wanted to wipe out humanity. He pulled out a small device from his belt pack and activated it. The quantum beacon's destruct sequence was now armed. If the aliens got too close to capturing the data, Jake could destroy it with the push of a button. The explosion would take out most of the building and everything within 100 meters. Including Jake himself, the Marine sergeant took a deep breath and shouldered his rifle. The aliens below were starting to move, forming attack formations. Their chittering grew louder, more aggressive. Jake could see their mandibles clicking. With anticipation, time to show these bugs what a human Marine could do. The first wave hit at dawn. Jake watched through his scope as 5,000 Zephyrian shock troopers moved across the open ground toward the communication center. They came in perfect lines, their chitinous armor gleaming in the morning light. Their forearms moved in rhythm as they advanced, weapons ready, mandibles clicking with hunger. Jake let them get close. Real close. The aliens were 50 meters away when he pressed the first detonator. The explosion at the main entrance turned the front rank of aliens into flying pieces. Chunks of concrete and metal flew through the air, taking out another dozen Zephyrians behind them. The blast created a crater 3 meters wide, blocking the main approach to the building, but the aliens kept coming. They flowed around the crater, like water around a rock, never breaking formation. Jake had expected them to pause, to regroup, to show some kind of reaction to losing their front line. Instead, they just kept moving forward. He opened fire with his rifle, picking off the lead. Aliens one by one. His shots were clean and accurate, each bullet finding its mark in the gaps between their armor plates. Zephyrians at the front dropped, but more took their place immediately. The aliens reached the side entrances. At the east door, they tried to push through the narrow funnel Jake had created. The first alien squeezed through the gap between the stacked furniture, and Jake put 2 rounds in its head. The second one climbed over the body of the first, and Jake dropped it too. The aliens kept coming through the funnel, one at a time, and Jake kept shooting. Bodies piled up in the narrow space, but the Zephyrians showed no fear. They climbed over their dead companions without hesitation, driven by their hive mind to complete the mission. At the west entrance, the automated turrets opened fire. The machine guns chattered loudly, spraying bullets into the crowd of aliens trying to break through. The turrets were programmed to fire in controlled bursts, conserving ammunition while maximizing kills. Jake had set them up perfectly, but the aliens were learning. After losing 50 warriors to the turrets, they began throwing rocks and debris at the automated weapons. Their aim was perfect, coordinated by their shared consciousness. One by one, the turrets went silent. Jake moved to the windows on the second floor. The aliens were climbing the walls of the building, using their claws to dig into the concrete. They moved like giant spiders, their forearms giving them perfect balance as they scaled the vertical surface. He leaned out of a window and fired down at the climbing aliens. His bullets sparked off their armor, but some found the soft joints between the plates. Aliens fell from the wall, crashing to the ground below, but more kept climbing. One Zephyrian made it to the second floor window. It thrust its head through the opening, mandibles snapping at Jake's face. Jake jammed his rifle barrel into the creature's mouth and pulled the trigger. The alien's head exploded in a shower of green fluid. More aliens were coming through the windows now. Jake fell back to the central stairwell, using the high ground to his advantage. He had set up a kill zone at the top of the stairs. With clear fields of fire in all directions, the aliens poured up the stairs like a black tide. Jake fired into the massive bodies, his rifle on full automatic. Empty brass casings flew through the air as he burned through his ammunition. When his rifle ran dry, he switched to his sidearm, a heavy pistol with armor-piercing rounds. The aliens reached the top of the stairs, and Jake activated another surprise. He had rigged explosive charges to the ceiling supports, weakening the structure above the stairwell. When he hit the detonator, tons of concrete and steel crashed down on the aliens below. The building shook from the explosion. Dust and debris filled the air, making it hard to see. Jake coughed and wiped his eyes, then checked his ammunition. 2 magazines left for his rifle, half a clip for his pistol. Not good, he could hear the aliens regrouping below. Their chittering had changed, becoming more aggressive. They were angry now, and anger made them dangerous. Jake had killed hundreds of them, but there were still thousands more outside. The human marine moved to a new position, using the building's ventilation system to travel between floors. The aliens expected him to fight like they did, in fixed positions with predictable tactics. But Jake was human, and humans were adaptable. He dropped through a ceiling tile into a room full of computer equipment. The aliens had broken through the east entrance and were searching the ground floor. Jake could hear them moving through the corridors below, their claws clicking on the concrete floor. Jake pulled out a grenade and cooked it for 3 seconds, before dropping it through a hole in the floor. The explosion echoed through the building, followed by the screams of wounded aliens. Green blood splattered on the walls as the blast took out a dozen Zephyrians. The aliens responded by firing their weapons through the ceiling. Energy bolts punched through the concrete, missing Jake by inches. He rolled behind a bank of servers and returned fire, his bullets finding targets in the rooms below. But the aliens were getting smarter. They had figured out his pattern of movement, and were trying to cut off his escape routes. Groups of warriors positioned themselves at key points throughout the building, waiting for him to appear. Jake checked his watch. 2 hours had passed since the attack began. 4 hours until the evacuation fleet reached safety. He had to hold out for 4 more hours against an enemy that never got tired, never felt fear, and never stopped coming. The building shook again, as more aliens smashed through the walls. Jake could hear them in the ventilation system now, crawling through the ducts like metal insects. They were everywhere, and they were closing in. Jake Morrison smiled grimly and checked his rifle. More time. The real fight was just beginning. The ground trembled as the second wave approached. Jake peered through a crack in the wall and felt his heart sink. 15,000 aliens this time, and these were different from the first wave, bigger, meaner, armed with heavy weapons and covered in thicker armor. The new aliens moved in 3 groups. The first group carried massive shield generators that created walls of crackling energy. The second group pushed forward huge wheeled cannons that looked like they could punch through a tank. The third group flew overhead on metallic wings, their bodies adapted for aerial combat. Jake had spent the last hour preparing for this moment. His ammunition was almost gone, but he had found other ways to fight. The colony's industrial sector was full of tools and machines that could be turned into weapons: mining lasers, plasma cutters, atmospheric processors. All of it was now part of Jake's arsenal. The flying aliens attacked first. They dove toward the communication center like metallic birds of prey, their wings cutting through the air with sharp, whistling sounds. Jake was ready for them. He had repositioned one of the mining lasers on the roof, connecting it to the building's main power grid. The laser beam cut through the first flying alien like a hot knife through butter. The creature's body split in half, green fluid spraying across the sky. Jake swung the laser toward the next target, but the aliens were already adapting. They scattered in different directions, making themselves harder to hit. Jake managed to take down 3 more flyers before they reached the building. The survivors crashed through the windows, their claws scraping against the concrete walls. One alien landed on the same floor as Jake, its 4 arms spreading wide as it prepared to attack. Jake dropped the laser controls and grabbed his combat knife. The alien was fast, but Jake was faster. He rolled under the creature's first swipe and drove his blade into the soft joint where its wing met its body. The alien screamed and spun around, trying to grab him with its other arms. Jake pulled out his pistol and emptied the clip into the alien's head. Green blood splattered across the wall as the creature collapsed. Jake quickly reloaded and moved to a new position. More flyers were coming through the windows. Outside, the ground-based aliens had reached the building. Their shield generators created a protective barrier around the communication center, trapping Jake inside. The energy shields hummed with Power. Blocking all the exits and making the air taste like metal, the aliens with the heavy cannons began firing at the building. Each shot shook the structure like an earthquake. Chunks of concrete fell from the ceiling as the walls started to crack. Jake realized the aliens were trying to bring the whole building down on top of him. He had to do something fast. Jake made his way to the basement where the colony's fusion reactor provided power for the entire settlement. The reactor was designed to be safe, with multiple backup systems to prevent accidents. But Jake knew how to disable those safety systems. He began rewiring the reactor's control panel, connecting the power output directly to the building's electrical grid. If he could overload the system, he might be able to take out the alien shield generators and give himself a chance to escape. The building shook again as another cannon shot hit the upper floors. Jake worked faster, his fingers flying over the control switches. Sweat dripped into his eyes as he traced the electrical pathways, looking for the right connections. A sound from the stairwell made him look up. The aliens had broken through the basement door. 3 of them were coming down the stairs, their weapons ready. Jake had nowhere to run. He grabbed a plasma cutter from a nearby workbench and turned it on. The tool was designed to cut through metal, but it would work just as well on alien armor. Jake swung the cutter in a wide arc, the superheated plasma beam slicing through the first alien's arm. The creature screamed and fell back, green blood pouring from its wound. The second alien fired its weapon, an energy bolt that missed Jake by inches and melted a hole in the wall behind him. Jake ducked and came up swinging the plasma cutter, cutting the alien in half at the waist. The third alien was smarter. It stayed back and fired carefully aimed shots while Jake tried to get close. The energy bolts came closer and closer to hitting him. Jake rolled behind a piece of machinery and looked for another way to attack. He found it in the atmospheric processor. The machine was designed to convert the planet's thin air into breathable atmosphere for the colonists. But Jake had learned how to reverse the process. He activated the processor and pointed its output nozzle at the alien. The machine began sucking all the oxygen out of the air around the alien. The creature gasped and choked, its forearms flailing as it struggled to breathe. Jake stepped out from behind his cover and put 3 bullets in the alien's head. He turned back to the reactor controls, but it was too late. The building shook one more time, and then the ceiling started to collapse. Jake grabbed his gear and ran for the emergency tunnel he had prepared earlier. The tunnel led to the colony's water treatment plant, 200 meters away from the communication center. Jake crawled through the narrow space as the building collapsed behind him. Dust and debris filled the tunnel, making it hard to breathe. He emerged from the tunnel just as the communication center exploded. The overloaded reactor had finally given way, creating a massive fireball that consumed the entire building. The explosion was so bright that Jake had to cover his eyes. When the light faded, Jake saw that his plan had worked. The reactor explosion had taken out the alien shield generators and destroyed at least 1,000 of the enemy warriors. But there were still thousands more, and they were very angry. The surviving aliens were regrouping in the streets around the burning ruins. Jake could see their leaders pointing in his direction. They had figured out where he was hiding. Jake checked his remaining supplies. 1 clip for his pistol, 2 grenades, a handful of improvised explosives. And now he was trapped in a water treatment plant with no way out. The aliens began their advance toward his new position. Jake smiled grimly and prepared for the next round of the fight. 20,000 elite Zephian guards surrounded the water treatment plant. These aliens were different from the others Jake had fought. They moved with deadly silence, their armor was black instead of brown, and their weapons glowed with purple energy. Worst of all, some of them seemed to disappear and reappear like ghosts. Jake pressed his back against the concrete wall of the treatment facility and tried to catch his breath. Blood seeped from a cut on his forehead where debris had hit him during the explosion. His left shoulder ached from where an alien claw had grazed him in the basement fight. But he was still alive, and that was what mattered. The water treatment plant was smaller than the communication center, with fewer places to hide. Jake had explored every room, every corridor, every pipe and tank. The building processed millions of gallons of water each day, cleaning it and making it safe for the colonists to drink. Now it would be his final battlefield. Through a window, Jake watched the aliens form a perfect circle around the building. They were in no hurry this time. The elite guards moved with careful precision, checking every angle, every possible escape route. They had learned from the previous battles that the human was dangerous and unpredictable. Jake noticed something strange about these new aliens. Some of them would vanish for a few seconds, then reappear somewhere else. Stealth technology, he realized. They could turn invisible and move without being seen. That explained how they had gotten so close to the building without him noticing. A chill ran down Jake's spine as he felt something behind him. He spun around, pistol ready, but saw nothing. The room was empty, but Jake's military training told him he was not alone. Something was watching him. He backed toward the center of the room, keeping his weapon raised. The air seemed to shimmer slightly near the doorway. Jake fired 3 shots at the distortion. Green blood splattered on the floor as an invisible alien materialized. Clutching its wounded chest, more aliens began appearing throughout the building. They had been infiltrating while Jake was distracted by the ones outside. Jake ran toward the main processing chamber, the largest room in the facility. If he was going to make a stand, he needed space to maneuver. The processing chamber was filled with huge tanks and pipes that carried water through different cleaning stages. Jake climbed onto one of the tanks and looked around. At least a dozen aliens were closing in from all directions. Some were visible, others were just shimmers in the air. Jake remembered something from his training. Infrared vision could sometimes detect cloaked enemies by their body heat. He pulled out his night vision goggles and switched them to thermal mode. Suddenly, he could see all the invisible aliens as glowing figures against the cool background of the room. He opened fire, tracking the heat signatures with his pistol. One invisible alien after another dropped to the floor, their stealth systems failing as they died. But Jake's ammunition was running dangerously low. He had maybe 10 shots left. The visible aliens began firing back with their energy weapons. Purple bolts sizzled through the air, melting holes in the metal tanks around Jake. He jumped from tank to tank. Using the maze of pipes and equipment as cover, one energy bolt came too close. It hit the tank Jake was standing on, and suddenly thousands of gallons of water came rushing out. The torrent knocked 2 aliens off their feet and sent them tumbling across the floor. Jake realized the water might be his salvation. He shot at the control valves for the other tanks. Water began flooding the chamber floor, rising quickly as more tanks emptied. The aliens found themselves standing in knee-deep water, their movement slowed by the current. Jake had one more idea. The water treatment plant used powerful electrical systems to run the pumps and filters. If he could get electricity into the water, he might be able to electrocute the aliens all at once. He climbed higher, reaching the electrical control panel for the main pumps. The aliens were firing at him constantly now, their energy bolts sparking off the metal pipes around him. Jake ignored the danger and began ripping out electrical cables. An invisible alien appeared right behind him. Jake spun around and grabbed the creature's arm, using its own momentum to throw it off the platform. The alien splashed into the electrified water below and convulsed as electricity coursed through its body. Jake connected the main power cable to a metal pipe that ran into the water. Sparks flew as electricity arced through the flooded chamber. Every alien standing in the water screamed as the current hit them. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. But the trick only worked once. The electrical system overloaded and shut down, leaving the chamber in darkness. Jake activated his night vision and saw that half the aliens were dead, floating in the water. The survivors had climbed onto pipes and equipment to get out of the electrified pool. Jake was out of ammunition now. He drew his combat knife and prepared for close combat. The first alien leaped at him from across the room, its 4 arms reaching for his throat. Jake ducked and slashed upward with his blade, opening the creature's belly. More aliens jumped at him from different directions. Jake fought with desperate fury, his knife cutting through alien flesh and armor. He was faster than they expected, more flexible than their hive mind could predict. But there were too many of them. An alien claw raked across Jake's back, tearing through his uniform and drawing blood. Another alien grabbed his left arm, its mandibles snapping toward his face. Jake headbutted the creature and broke free, but more aliens were coming. He retreated to the far end of the chamber, where the biggest water tank still stood intact. This tank was different from the others. It was the main reservoir, holding clean water for the entire colony. And it was connected to the colony's emergency systems. Jake climbed to the top of the tank and found what he was looking for: the emergency release valve. If he opened it, millions of gallons of water would flood the entire facility in seconds. It would probably kill him too, but it would definitely kill the aliens. The aliens were climbing the tank now, their claws scraping against the metal. Jake could see their glowing eyes in the darkness, getting closer and closer. He put his hand on the release valve and smiled. Jake Morrison had held out for 4 hours against impossible odds. 1 more hour and the evacuation fleet would be safe. 1 more hour and humanity would survive. But first, he had to deal with 20,000 very angry aliens. Jake turned the valve and held on tight as the water tank exploded. The water hit Jake like a freight train. Millions of gallons crashed through the treatment facility, sweeping aliens and debris before it like toys. Jake held onto a pipe with both hands as the torrent tried to tear him away. The roar of rushing water filled his ears, drowning out the screams of the aliens below. When the flood finally stopped, Jake found himself lying in 6 inches of muddy water on the floor of the facility. His entire body ached and his left arm hung at an odd angle, probably broken. Blood ran from a dozen cuts on his face and arms, mixing with the dirty water around him. But he was alive. Most of the aliens were not. Their bodies floated in the water, their black armor cracked and broken. The flood had done what Jake's weapons could not. It had killed thousands of the elite guards in a single stroke. Jake struggled to his feet and looked around. The treatment facility was destroyed, its walls cracked, and its equipment scattered. But through the broken windows he could see more aliens outside. The final wave was coming. 10,000 Ephirian command units marched across the flooded ground toward the ruined building. These were the biggest aliens Jake had ever seen. Each one stood 9 feet tall, with armor that gleamed like polished metal. Their weapons were massive, carried by 2 of their 4 arms. And at the center of the group walked 3 creatures that could only be the supreme commanders. Jake checked his gear. No ammunition left. His combat knife was lost somewhere in the flood. His left arm was useless. All he had was his wits and his determination to protect humanity. The quantum beacon was gone, destroyed when the communication center exploded. The aliens could not get Earth's coordinates now, but Jake knew they would kill him anyway, just for the satisfaction of it. He had cost them 50,000 warriors and shown them that humans were not as weak as they had believed. The first command unit entered the facility through the main entrance. It had to duck to fit through the doorway, its massive frame filling the opening. Jake hid behind a broken piece of equipment and watched as more aliens filed in behind it. These aliens moved differently from the others. They spread out in a careful search pattern, checking every corner and shadow. Their shared consciousness made them perfectly coordinated, but Jake had learned something important during his battles. The hive mind was also a weakness. When one alien spotted danger, they all reacted the same way. When one alien made a mistake, they all made the same mistake. The predictability that had helped Jake survive this long might give him one last chance. Jake picked up a piece of broken metal and threw it across the room. The sound echoed through the facility, and every alien head turned toward the noise. They moved as one toward the source of the sound. Their weapons ready, while they were distracted, Jake crept toward the facility's main control room. The room housed the computer systems that controlled the colony's infrastructure: power grid, water supply, waste management, and most importantly, the fusion reactor that powered everything. The reactor was located underground, beneath the colony's main street. It was designed to be safe, with multiple layers of protection and automatic shutdown systems. But Jake had learned how to override those systems. He had done it once before, and he could do it again. Jake reached the control room and began working on the computer terminals. His right hand flew over the keyboard, accessing the reactor's control systems. The aliens were getting closer, their heavy footsteps echoing through the building. The first alien found the control room. Just as Jake finished entering the override codes, the creature filled the doorway, its four arms spread wide, its mandibles clicking with rage. Jake stood up and faced the alien, his hand hovering over the final activation key. More aliens crowded into the room behind the first one. Jake could see the three Supreme Commanders pushing through the crowd, their eyes glowing with hatred. They had finally cornered the human who had caused them so much trouble. One of the commanders spoke, its voice like grinding metal. Jake did not understand the alien words, but he could guess what they meant. Surrender, submit, die slowly. Jake smiled and shook his head. He had held out for 6 hours against 50,000 aliens. The evacuation fleet was safe now, jumping through hyperspace toward human territory. Earth would be warned. Humanity would be ready. The commander raised its weapon, a massive cannon that could blow Jake into pieces. But Jake was faster. He slammed his hand down on the activation key and felt the computer systems respond. Deep underground, the fusion reactor began to overload. Safety systems tried to shut it down, but Jake had disabled them all. The reactor's temperature climbed. Past the danger point, past the critical point, past the point of no return, the aliens realized what was happening. They turned to run, but it was too late. The reactor reached critical mass and exploded with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The explosion vaporized the control room, the treatment facility, and everything within a kilometer radius. Jake Morrison died in that explosion, along with the remaining 10,000 aliens. But his sacrifice had meaning. The intelligence gathered from the battle would help humanity develop new weapons and tactics. The delay he had caused gave the human fleet time to escape and warn Earth. 3 hours later, the human battleship Liberty arrived at Kepler 442b. Colonel Lisa Parker led the Marine rescue team that searched the ruins of New Haven Colony. They found Jake's body in the wreckage of the control room, still sitting at the computer terminal where he had made his final stand. The battle report that Colonel Parker filed became required reading at every military academy in human space. It told the story of Marine Sergeant Jake Morrison, who had held off 50,000 aliens for 6 hours using nothing but his training, his courage, and his refusal to give up. The report's final line became famous throughout the galaxy. When the odds were 50,000 to 1, humanity still found a way to win. Jake Morrison had kept his promise after all. He had come home a hero.